Hey guys, in this quick video, we are going to talk about how to easily convert an existing master slave architecture into a Galera cluster, right? So you can see here, I have one max scale server that is running max scale 2.5. And then we can see that there are three nodes in the cluster. The first one is of course the master, then the remaining two are the slave nodes, and then we have a GTID that is of course consistent across all the three nodes. And over here we have those three nodes basically, right? So um, if I check for the slave status on these two nodes, show slave status, I can see that these two nodes are indeed slave nodes, and then the GTID should be in sync with what MaxScale is reporting. Yeah, and then we can also see that the slave IO and the slave SQL, both of these threads are running for both of these nodes. So which means basically that the slaves are in a healthy state, right? So since this particular node is a master, I can do that by checking very quickly show slave status, and then it shouldn't report anything. So but if I let's say very quickly, if I do watch maxctrl list servers, so now we have a constant update on this list server. So if I do a test database, let's say I created a database, and then we should see that the GTID is indeed moving across all three nodes, which means that if I do a show slave status here, you remember the last output was 2. If I do a show slave status again, now of course it's been updated here as well. So which means that the cluster is in a healthy state right now, and the replication is working fine. So what we are going to do now is I'm going to show you very simple configuration for these three nodes. So let's do that very quickly. Quit from here, pi/etc/my.cnf.d/server.cnf file. So since it's running on CentOS, I believe it's CentOS 7 if I'm not wrong, and then the default path is going to be my.cnf.d under the etc folder, right? So then you will have this server.cnf file, and then we also know that the version that is installed on all these three nodes is MariaDB 10.5.13 enterprise version. But the process that we are going to follow is going to be the same regardless of the version you are using. So you might be on a community version, you might be on a newer version, or you might be on an older version. The process that we are going to do is going to be the same, right? So you don't expect to see any differences when it comes to what we are going to do later on in this particular video. So let's edit this file. What I have here is a very basic setup, right? So nothing special really. So just that the server ID is different for all three nodes. As you can see that this is 1000, 2000 and 3000 here, and everything else is identical, right? So we are logging our error messages into the server.log file. Then you have bin logs enabled, then we have a bin log index defined, and then the bin log format is defined as row. And then I have a basic meaning a global bind address that we basically can accept connections from any IP or any source IP that is coming. And then as a standard, I also have enabled this log slave updates. So which means that even on the slave node, whenever the data gets replicated over there, the bin logs will be generated for those nodes as well. So that is super important. If let's say we want to fail over to another node, if from server 1 to server 2, if you want to fail over the master to this node, then those bin logs that are being generated by this particular guy are going to play a part, very important part, because if we don't have that, then the slave will not be able to promote as a master. So that is something important, that you need to have these enabled. Not only that, there are many other advantages, but anyway, that's not the scope of this video. But just know that this is an important config, and then you should always have this enabled for your master slave replication. And other than that, if you scroll up, I have, just to save time, I have already copied or rather created the Galera side of the configuration as well on these three nodes. You can see that we have this WSREP on, then we have this provider option that is going to point to the Galera SO file or the library file, the enterprise library file, and then you have this Galera Galera address that is going to have all the three nodes IP addresses separated by comma, right? We can see that this is first IP, second IP, and then the third IP, and then they are separated by a comma. Just one quick note here. Make sure that there are no spaces in this address, because I learned the hard way a while ago. My cluster just wouldn't start, right? So I had everything done, and then my cluster was not starting. Then after a whole day of debugging and checking, I realized that there was a space after the commas here, and then that caused the cluster or this address not to connect to that node somehow. So it's a weird issue, but yeah, just keep in mind, just don't keep any spaces here, right? And then I have this SST method defined as Maria backup. So the default SST method is rsync. Again, SST method, we are not going to discuss what exactly is that, but just at a high level note, SST is a snapshot state transfer, is short for snapshot state transfer. What happens that if, let's say, the node 2 or node 3 was offline for maybe a day or 2 days, and then you start that node again, now that node is of course missing a lot of data, right? So what will happen that the Galera, one of these available nodes, will become a data donor, and then they will initiate either SST or IST, right? So SST is a snapshot state transfer. So what SST really is a full Maria backup of that server, either this one or this one, full Maria backup of that node, and then that Maria backup is going to be transferred over to the joining node, and then it's going to basically rebuild that node from scratch, right? So it's a very fast and efficient, and it's using MariaDB, of course. The default method is rsync. So rsync, as we know already, rsync is like SFTP or FTP. So it will basically take a copy of the entire file system data directory and rsync that particular set of files to the new server, and then basically rebuild that node also using rsync. But the drawback using rsync is that it can create locks, not can, but it will definitely create locks on that particular node, whichever node is becoming the donor, right? So that might be this first node or maybe the second node. So it will create a lock, exclusive lock on that node, and that node you will see that will move out of the cluster. So you will see that it will show as just running. So it's no longer a part of the cluster, which means that you cannot do read or write on that particular node. That node has been moved out of the cluster temporarily while that rsync is happening. So again, Maria backup is definitely beneficial because it doesn't create any locks, and then you can do it online. And then the SST auth, you will see that all these three nodes have the same thing. SST auth is defined as SST auth basically means that if we are using Maria backup, then what is the database user that we are going to use for Maria backup? So in this case, I already have a user created in our database. So that's backup user, because anyway, when you have a master slave running, you definitely need to have Maria backup user created, because you will be using that user to take regular backups and doing the restore and whatnot. So for that purpose, I already have a user created here. So that the username goes here, and then of course the password goes here. Now you might be asking, hey, why do we have the password in open text in a config file, right? So yes, I agree with you completely. It's not a good idea to have that, but just for this video's sake, I'm just leaving it like this. But of course there are other alternatives available. You don't that one of those the nicest alternative that I can tell you right now is that you need to create an OS user with this name, right? So you need to create an OS user with the name backup, and then create that user in the database, saying that this user is going to be OS authenticated, right? So that basically means that the user backup is going to be on the OS as well, and also created on the database layer as well. And then you will say that this user is going to be OS authenticated, or in other words, going to use the socket file as the authenticator. I will show you that very quickly later on. So yeah, so the authentication will be via socket file or Linux socket. So what that means is that whenever you log into the server, whenever you log into the OS as backup user, right? So you can basically connect to MariaDB without a password, because that backup user is an OS authenticated user. But you have to log into the OS with that user, and then you can connect to the database without a password. So in this case, this backup user is not an OS user. So that is why I have the password hard-coded here. So these are the two options available. Of course, the recommended one is that you have an OS user that is already there on the OS, and then also created in the backend with that same user. So yeah, so that's that. So these two things are for that SST. So these two are required, very important. And then finally, you will have these two configurations. Again, this is a very basic set of Galera minimum required Galera configurations here. I don't have any special thing going on here. So just very basic base requirements. So these two nodes are the local for individual nodes. So if you see that everything else is basically is a ditto copy of for this one on all these three servers, right? So there's no change at all. I think I do something. Yeah, I think I did. I accidentally copy pasted this node address here. Okay. Anyway, so yeah. So if you see that this first four lines are identical for all these three nodes because they are basically pointing to the three node Galera cluster configuration and then the library path. And then this one, of course, SST method and SSD auth connectivity settings. But these two settings after that are going to be dependent on each node, right? So you can see that this node address is going to be the IP address of this particular node. And then this one is going to be the IP address of this particular node. And similarly, the last one is the IP address of this particular node. Then you have this node name, right? So this node name is up to you what you want to use, right? So I'm just using Galera 1, Galera 2, and Galera 3 for ease. But you can use the host name here, or you can use any notation or any naming convention that you want to follow. It's just for Galera to identify that, yeah, so this is my node 1, and then it's going to log or display this node name also in the logs, so that you know which this error is coming from which node and whatnot, right? So that those are the basic things here. But anyway, for now, these are all commented out, right? Because I have a master slave replication running. We don't have a Galera setup yet. I just have it there just to save time. So I'm going to quit and exit from here. And then I'm going to show you, yeah, I'm going to show you the max scale configuration part for just for a bit, very quick look. So again, max scale configuration, the standard location, it will be under etc maxscale.cnf. So if I edit, so we can see that we have automatic threads definition based on the CPU, that based on the number of CPUs available in the node. And then we have this server 1 configuration. So that is going to point to the server 1's IP address, right? So this server's IP address is this one, and then the server 1's port, and then the protocol is, of course, MariaDB backend. Similarly, I have server 2 and server 3 defined. So these are just basically defining the IPs and the port number for individual all those three servers. And then the important section here is the MariaDB monitor section. So that monitor is of course the type of monitor, and then the module this monitor is using is MariaDB mon. So this MariaDB mon basically is used when you're running a master slave architecture, right? So it's a standard master slave architecture. But if let's say you are later on, we are going to convert this to a Galera cluster, then instead of MariaDB mon, we are going to change it to Galera mon, right? So it's going to be a Galera monitor. Similarly, if you have an expand cluster, MariaDB expand cluster, then there's a separate monitor for that. And also if you're running column store, MariaDB column store, then there's a separate monitor for that, right? So but the basic configuration still remains almost the same with few exceptions. Then once we have converted it to Galera, we are going to remove some of these settings from here, right? Because for example, like this one, verify master failure, enforce read-only slaves, automatic failover true, auto rejoin true, all these configurations are not relevant anymore for Galera, because Galera will take care of that on its own. Maxscale will not do the failover, but Galera is the only one internally they are going to handle that. Maxscale is just going to point to the first node in the list of servers as a master, and then the remaining two nodes is going to just show you as a read-only slave. But even though they are all masters, because they are still Galera nodes, they are still masters, but Maxscale is just going to give you a logical view, I would say, as one for read-write operation, than the other two nodes just for read scaling, just for reading purpose only, right? There are some advantages of doing that, because it can avoid deadlocks and some other issues that comes with the multi-master read and write operations. So yeah, so Maxscale will help you with that as well. And then the cooperative monitoring locking, again, this is something that is not required anymore for Galera. So we are going to remove this as well. And then later on we have this read write split service where is going to distribute your reads and write across these three nodes, right? Server 1, server 2, server 3. I think everything here remains the same. There is no changes over here. So you just simply have the user, then the password for the max scale user, and then you have a master reconnection true, meaning if the node is offline and then the node comes back again, then the max scale will automatically connect to that node. And similarly, the most important one is a transaction replay. So whenever your connection is doing something on the master and then that node goes offline, maxscale will automatically move that transaction to a new server in Galera, and it will replay that transaction automatically, so you don't have any failures of your transaction, right? So that's the simple thing. That we have causal reads enabled true as well, just for read consistency. This one also we are going to remove because for a Galera cluster this is not there, right? So this doesn't work. This is only applicable for a master slave architecture. So we are going to remove this as well. For Galera anyway, we know that is synchronous replication, so the data is going to be consistent across all the nodes most of the time, so we can safely do reads and write from any node. So yeah, so that's nothing to worry about. And then finally we have the listener, that this listener is actually pointing to the read write service, and then whenever the client is connected to this port on the max scale IP, they are going to be going to or connected to this particular service, right? So they are going to be getting all the benefits of master reconnection, the transaction replay, and all that cool stuff. So they are going to have all that. All right, so I think that's all there is. So very simple changes we will be doing in this max scale as well. But for now, just let's see what are the basic things that we want to do before we move this cluster into a Galera cluster, or we transform this cluster into a Galera cluster. First thing that we're going to do is we are going to stop max scale service first of all, because we don't want max scale messing up with the cluster while we are doing some changes there, because of course you know that is automatic failover and all that stuff. So we don't want that to be disturbing us in any way. And then let's quickly connect to all the three nodes. So MariaDB, yeah. So if we do show slave status, we know that we have, of course this one is not a slave, these two are slaves, right? So that's fine. We want to reset that slave status. We want to clear away all the bin logs and all the slave statuses from these three nodes. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply stop slave, even though this node is not a slave, but I'm just running that over here as well. It will not make any difference, but because I have this typing broadcast happening, so I just have to type it here, and then I will just say reset master, reset slave all, right? So what this is going to do is a reset master on the master node. What is going to do is going to reset or clear away all the local binary logs that are being generated by this server, right? So it will clear away all those bin logs. And then similarly, reset slave all will reset the slave statuses. But of course, on the master node, this will not do anything. This will affect basically this node and this node, because these are the slave nodes. And then once this is done, when we do a show slave tracer, we will not see anything of this sort, right? So we'll see something like this, right? Whatever we saw on the master, these two nodes will become like standalone nodes, basically not a part of any cluster in any way, right? And then the reset master also is going to reset the local binary logs of those machines. But before we run, let's do a very quick check. Show binary logs. If I do this, I can see that of course the master has a bunch of more logs available. The slaves have the two slaves have almost identical logs, but we can see that this log number 4 is 7 to 2. This is consistent. 7 to 1 is consistent with all the three nodes, which means that all these three nodes are basically in sync, right? So if I do the reset now, let's do that. So it did a stop slave, reset master, and reset slave all, right? So first of all, let's check for the show slave status. Now we'll see that all these three nodes are not showing anything at all, right? So this one already was not showing, but the other two nodes are already no longer slave of this guy, right? So similarly, if we do a show bin logs again, we will see that they all have been reset to the default binary log, right? So the bin log 1, bin log 1, and bin log 1 with the position of 330, right? So that's the default location, but this 330 may be different for different versions, but for the MariaDB version I'm using is 330, right? So that doesn't matter, doesn't really matter. So now let's start the MaxScale server and then check what do we see when we run this list server. We see that the first node is still the master because that was already the master, so it still remains the master, but it's not a master of any other nodes. MaxScale is just showing us that it's a master. But the other two nodes, we can see they are just simply running, right? So they are just simply in a independent server, basically standalone server rather, right? So these two are standalone servers, they are not slave of anyone, but the only one thing that we want to make sure that we have a reset of is the GTID position, right? So let's do that as well. Set global GTID slave position equals to empty string. So when we do that, we will see when we do this maxctr list servers again, we will see that the GTID has also gone away. So now these three nodes are in a very clean state, meaning they don't have any GTIDs, they don't have any replication setup going on and nothing like that, right? So now we should stop MaxScale one more time because we don't want it to be disturbing us, and I'm going to quit from here and let's edit the server.cnf file. What we are going to do now is I'm going to uncomment these few lines that, yeah, so this one I think last time I forgot. So this one is just defining the Galera specific arguments, right? So these, like for example, the Galera cache size, which is going to be very, very important for a node that is joining sometime later. So Galera cache recovery, basically. So it's important to have a large enough Galera cache defined. But anyway, that's a topic for a separate video where we discuss Galera in detail, but not today. So the idea is just to see how we can simply convert an existing master slave into a Galera cluster, right? So then everything else remains the same. Over here we are going to be commenting out the server ID because for Galera we are not going to be using the server ID. The logging, we can have it there. The bin logs, we can still have it enabled, doesn't matter. Because anyway it's also recommended to have bin logs for point in time recovery purposes, so just make sure that your bin logs are enabled. The bin log format is very important for Galera. It should always be row based bin log format, so that's important. And everything else, the log slave update is also okay, you can have it there. It's going to basically whenever a data gets replicated over, so it's going to log its local bin logs as well, right, for the other remaining nodes in the cluster. But if you want to, you can disable it for Galera, but yeah, I mean, we can have it there because this is just going to take a bit more space. So yeah, why not? Let's just disable it for now. So we just have the log errors, the bin log enabled, and the bin log row format is enabled, and then the bind address is enabled, right? So yeah, so some very basic configuration, nothing special going on here. The only special things are for the Galera section, right? So we have enabled. Let's talk about this one. So this one is a bit tricky because this path and this file name might be different for different operating systems and different MariaDB versions, right? So first of all, if you are running a community version, then you will not see the name enterprise in the file name, right? So the libgalera .so file will be a different name if you are running a community version. And also this path itself might be different, right? So you may have a user lib than Galera. So lib64 is there in the CentOS or Red Hat Linux, but on the other operating system you may have a different path altogether. So how do you know where to look for this file, right? So again, you cannot just use this path there. So we have to make sure that our path is correct and then the file name is also correct. So I'm just going to save and exit these changes, but I'm not going to restart it just yet. So let's connect to MariaDB. So we'll check a variable very quickly, like plugin directory, right? So very simple, plugin directory. Okay, so plugin dir. What's the problem here? Show global variables. Yeah, my bad. Yep, there it is. So plugin directory is basically pointing to user lib64. So this is how I know that what is my base path going to be for all the other plugins are under the same location, are under this MySQL plugin, but Galera is different. Right? So Galera, as we saw, is under user lib64 Galera, then the name. But everything else, all the other plugins, like for example, if you do show plugins, so all these plugins like partition plugin, this simple password check plugin and whatnot, so all these plugins, InnoDB plugin, all those things are going to be under that the path that we just checked, this one. But for Galera is going to be still using the base as this one, but the name will be different. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to copy this path, quit from here, cd to that location, right? So cd to that location, and then I'm just going to do a find dot slash not slash grep minus I Galera, right? So let's just do that, and there it is. We can see that is under Galera folder under this user usr lib64. Then we have Galera, then lib Galera enterprise smm.so. So there's again this one without any folder. So this one is a community Galera library, but we are using the enterprise server, so we are going to be using this enterprise Galera file name, right? So Galera library basically. So yeah, so that's how you check, and that's how you define that path in your server.cnf file, this the provider option, right? So this provider is based on that particular search, the one we did just now. All right, so that's all there is. So I'm going to disable this broadcasting, right? So because I need to let's do that one more time. So go to the home folder and disable that. So from this first node, how you start a Galera cluster is a bit different from starting a normal MariaDB server. So when you start the Galera cluster for the very first time, meaning every time when you have all the nodes shut down, then you need to start the cluster in a different way, right? So in a very specific way, I should say. So that specific way is called bootstrapping the Galera cluster. So you have to bootstrap from a particular node, right? So I can bootstrap from this node, or I can bootstrap from this node, or I can bootstrap from this node. But that bootstrapping also takes a little bit of care, because you should not bootstrap just from any node. But since this is the very first time we are starting the cluster, it doesn't really matter, right? So but once you have the cluster up and running, and then you have some transition coming in, and then when you shut down the nodes one by one, then you need to bootstrap from the last node which was shut down in the cluster, right? So maybe once we shut down this one first, then this one, then this one. The next time when you bootstrap, you need to bootstrap from this particular node, the last one, right? So that's an important thing to take note of. Otherwise you may lose some data, right? So that's an important thing. So let's start the cluster from this one, and starting the cluster is again super important, super easy, not really important. Again, of course, it's important. You need to have the cluster running, right? So Galera new cluster, right? So that's how you start a cluster. Let's run it. Okay, so it did not work. Why it did not work? Because MariaDB server is still running, right? So systemctl stop MariaDB. Let's stop it. Yeah, of course we don't have a MariaDB here. I don't care. So MariaDB has been stopped on all three nodes. So let's start the Galera new cluster again. Yeah, now you see it took a little bit of time, and then it started the cluster. So if I connect to MariaDB now, again, yeah, and another important thing, you might have noticed that I did not install anything to get Galera on my server, right? So I have an enterprise server running, or maybe you have a community version running on your server. Galera is by default or automatically installed, so it's just up to you whether you are using it or not using it, right? So Galera will be always there whenever you install an enterprise server or a MariaDB server. Galera will always be there. It's just a matter of enabling that in your config file. So yeah, so we have done Galera new cluster from this node, and then we are now connected. If we check for a particular status variable, not a server variable, but I'm talking about a status variable, right? So if I check for a show global status like WSREP cluster size, I can see that my cluster size is currently 1, right? So this is a good sign that my cluster, at least the first node, has initiated the Galera component, and then it has also joined that cluster, right? So my first node is already a part of the Galera node, or Galera cluster. So on the second node, I'm going to do this one by one for the very first time, right? So on the second node, I'm just going to make sure etc server.name. I just want to make sure that my Galera config is enabled. Yes, it's enabled with this Ssd method and Ssd Auth already properly done. I need to make sure that I have a backup user already there that has the grants required for running Maria backup, right? So that those are important things. And then my server side is also ready, right? So server configuration is also ready. I already commented on the server ID, which is something I want to do. And now, how do I start it? Systemctl start MariaDB, right? So this is the trick. So the first node, you start using Galera new cluster. The other 2 nodes or 5 nodes, whatever number of nodes you might have, you just simply start them using the standard operating procedure like systemctl start MariaDB. Nothing special for that. Let's hope that it's able to connect to the cluster. If it starts, then it means that it's already connected to the cluster. Let's see. Okay, good news. So now you see that it took a little bit of time to start the cluster. So there are a few reasons for that. First of all, even though the data is in sync, but because it is missing some important Galera files, so MariaDB thinks that this node is out of sync from the cluster. So what would have happened is that MariaDB would have taken, or this node would have become the donor and would have used that SSD setting that we talked about just now, right? So those SSD settings, this SSD method Maria backup and SSD auth using backup user and password. So it would have used this to it would have used the SSD method to resynchronize this node with this node, right? So on the back end, MariaDB just now took a Maria backup on this node and then transferred that backup over here and then rebuild that node from scratch. So you see, it was very fast, but again, depending on the size of your database, if let's say you have 1 or 2 terabytes of master slave architecture, then it will take a bit of time because it will need to do a backup first of all of that big database and then transfer that backup over to this node and then rebuild it, right? So it will take a bit of time, but it's very easy, meaning there's no manual work involved basically. So you just simply configure Galera and then do that like so, very simple. So now if I check for that same WSREP cluster size, let's say there it is, I can see that now we have 2 nodes in the cluster, right? So good news. So same thing, I'm going to do very quick check on the Galera configuration, all there. The specific node setting is also properly done, and yeah, my server ID, oops, my server ID has something wrong here. So I need to comment this out, and I also need to comment this guy out, right? So yeah, the rest everything looks okay to me. Okay, save and exit, and then systemctl restart MariaDB, let's say. So this will also take a bit of time and then join the cluster. But again, one more important thing, if your database is very large, then you want to make sure that your MariaDB service file has a long timeout period defined or unlimited timeout period defined, because if it doesn't start within that time, then systemd will kick that procedure in the back and then kick it out of the cluster or out of the server, out of the processes basically. So yeah, you want to make sure that your process file, or rather the service file, has sufficient timeout period defined for start and stop, both of them, because first time it will take a bit of time. So now we see that the third node also started successfully. Let's take a quick look here. And there it is. We have a three-node Galara cluster running. So you saw that it's very, very simple, nothing special really. So just need to enable the Galara configurations, define that library path properly, and then yeah, and comment out some of the things that are not related to Galara cluster, like for example server ID, and maybe even some of the bin logs related stuff. We don't really need to have bin logs enabled, but we are still having that. Yeah? So it's always good to have binary logs for point in time recovery. Alrighty, so if I do a MariaDB connection now from all these three nodes, so what will happen is that I can do some transaction from here. Like for example, let's create a database here on the third node. Show databases. I can see that I have test database 3 already there. Test db3, create table T, ID as serial, and then C as departure 100. So the table gets created on the third node. Test db3, select star from T. I can see the table is there, right? I created on the second node. Insert into T, and I'm going to insert into the column C. Select so I'm just going to select column names, all the column names from the information schema.columns table, and then just dump it into this table C column, right? So we just inserted 2248 rows in that table. So select star from T on the second node, of course, is already replicated. Test db3, select star from T. And yep, we can see that data is actually replicating using Galera's replication, and we have a three-node cluster running perfectly fine. So very, very easy, very simple. Now let's see if we can modify our max scale to connect to this Galera cluster, right? So let's try to do that. Vi max scale or cnf file. So as we discussed earlier, the first thing that we're going to do is we need to change it to a Galera mon, right? So Galera monitor is the first thing, and then the things that we don't really need are this read-only settings, the verify master failure, automatic failover is not required, auto rejoin is not required, cooperative monitoring does not work with Galera. So all these properties that we are commenting out, they don't work, or they will give you error messages for Galera monitor, right? So they're saying that this variable does not exist. If we look at the read-write split service router, I don't think there's anything that is specific to, yeah, this one, causal read. So this one doesn't work. So we're just going to comment it out as well. Yeah, the listener is all good, right? So listener is all good. There's nothing wrong with the listener. Listener anyway is a very basic thing. So if I save and exit now and restart max scale, let's see if list servers. There you go. So now you can see that we have this now additional thing coming up saying as synced, synced, and synced, and synced, right? So all these three nodes are synced and they're running, and then Maxwell is basically showing this last node as a master, and the remaining two nodes there it's showing as a slave node. So, and GTID is still going to be there because we have the bin logs enabled. Yeah. So the GTID is tied to the bin log. So that's why it's showing us. It's a good thing to have. But the replication is not going to be based on the GTIDs, right? So that's something to keep an eye on. So the application is going to be internal process by Galera. It's not going to use the GTIDs at all. So one quick thing is if let's say we want this node to be this node to be the master all the time, we can define priorities on the configuration file for each node, and then we can tell the MariaDB monitor to use those priorities, right? So if you do that, then it will always pick up this node as a master. So if this node goes down, it will always pick up this node as a master. If this node goes down, then it will go to this node as a master, right? So this is how it's going to work. So let's see if we can put that in the config very quickly. we don't really need it. But if let's say there's something, if your client or your infrastructure or your manager wants you to do that, wants you to have one node as a master all the time, then what we need to do is we need to define a priority variable for all these three servers. So priority equals to 1, so the lower number is a higher priority, right? So that's the thing, just keep that in mind. Priority 2, and the last one priority 3. So priority 1, 2, 3. So this third one is the third priority. Of course, is going to take is going to be the master when no other service is available. So again, in this MariaDB monitor, we can just put it anywhere we want. Use, oops, sorry, I think I did something wrong. Yeah, just add a new row here. Use priority true. So when we say that use priority true, it will make use of those priority variables. And so I think I put it somewhere in, yeah, I put it in the wrong place. Yeah, my bad. So let's copy this, and we need to put it under the monitor section. Yeah, here. And then I'm going to delete that from here. Yeah, like so. And I think I deleted that priority. Priority equals to 3, right? So now I think hopefully this looks good. Yeah, looks good to me. Hopefully I did not put any typos and my parameter names are correct. So now we have this set priority. If I restart the server, if whatever I have done is correct, it should restart successfully. Okay, so thank goodness. So if I do maxCTR list servers now, it should follow those priorities, right? So it's now saying that, oh yeah, so this is the master node. So it's always going to pick this node as a master, this node as a second priority, this node as a third priority. So if I do this watch now, and then on this first node, stop my DB, if I do that now, the master will go to the second node, right? So similarly, oops, sorry, I need to go out, quit, stop my DB. So the master will go to the third node now. Yep, like so. And similarly, if let's say this node becomes available again, oh yeah, one more thing. So once you have the cluster running, right, so you don't need to do Galera new cluster anymore. While at least there's one node running in the cluster, meaning while there is still at least one node running in the cluster, you don't need to do Galera new cluster anymore. You can just simply do systemctl stop start. You can do that as you want, but you don't need to do Galera new cluster anymore. So start MariaDB. As soon as I start this node, it will join as a master automatically. You see, yeah, you see. So the Galera is actually using those priorities and then deciding which node will become the master and which node will become the slave. So similarly, let's start it up again. And yeah, this one should join as a slave, of course. But anyway, it's internally is a master, but it has joined as a slave. Yeah. All right, so that's pretty much it. But let's do one more thing before we exit from here. So if let's say I stop this node and then I stop the third node, right? The third node is down. Now this node is a master. So I do that stop again of this node now. Okay, so now we know that all the nodes are down, right? So if I do Galera new cluster from this node, it will not work, right? If I do Galera new cluster from this node, this will also not work. But if I do Galera new cluster from here, it will work. Then again, how do you know which node was the last to stop? You can do this way. You can try to start all these nodes, but there's a better way, right? So you go to the data directory, right? So var lib mysql, you will see a file called grstat, right? So grstat.data. So if I just do a cat of this file, you will see that there's a parameter here that says save to bootstrap 1. So as long as you have a save to bootstrap 1 on any particular node, then you can bootstrap from that node, right? So you can safely bootstrap from there. You can do Galera new cluster from there. Similarly, if I do MySQL GRA stat on this one, you'll see that bootstrap is showing 0. So similarly, the bootstrap is going to show 0 on the first node as well, because that is not safe to bootstrap. But let's say if you know for sure that all these three, there was no transaction coming in on the server when you stopped this cluster, right? So when you are very, very sure that there is no transaction coming in on the server, then you can forcefully update this file and then change this value to 1 and then do a Galera new cluster from that node. But if let's say we do that, and then there was some new transaction that happened on this node while this node was still alive, because you know that this node was the last to stop. So if there was some new transaction that already happened on this node, when we do a bootstrap from another node, Galera will realize that the UUID on this one is different from the UUID on this one, which means that now the other two nodes will have to resync again with this node. So that would also mean that the new data that was inserted here or updated here will be lost. So it will be in sync with this node now, right? So that's something important. Just make sure that yeah, that you always follow this approach and always start from this node. But if there are some chances where the bootstrap safe to bootstrap is 0 for all the three nodes, it can happen if the server crashes, meaning if all the three nodes crashed at the same time, then there might be chance that you will have a bootstrap 0. Then in that case, you can, you know that you need to recover the cluster, so you can just simply start the cluster from any node that you want to, just using the manual way of updating this file. Just edit this file and set this bootstrap to 1 and then do a Galera new cluster from there. So similarly, I'm just going to Galera new cluster from here now, and this should start. And now the other two nodes, I'm just going to use a standard way of starting the cluster. Start. And you can see that all these three nodes are started successfully, and the first node becomes the master again, right? So yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed this little video. I think it was not very small. It still took around 47 minutes, but yeah, I think we did cover some interesting topic today. And yeah, thanks a lot, guys. See you guys in another video. Bye.